I half-jokingly say, you know, I don't get invited to much anymore, so it's nice to be invited anywhere. So it's great to be with you, and I want to thank Gloria for her leadership, Betsy for her hospitality, and the opportunity that she afforded me earlier with Linda McKeever's help to tour the library and see what a great facility you have here in Manchester. Of course, you in your introduction explained that I'm not a native-born Vermonter. I don't usually emphasize that point, but you know the old line that I wanted to be born in Vermont, but I thought I should be near my mother. And she was elsewhere at the time. So, well, a provocative title was assigned me this afternoon. Whether we get to an answer or not, I guess will depend on how the conversation goes over the next hour or so. I'm in withdrawal. I'm trying to pay less attention to politics. I'm at about step 6 or so, I think, in that process, but it's kind of hard to ignore completely. And we had an election last fall, I think. That was kind of interesting in a variety of different ways. And I think, I don't see anyone here old enough to remember, but based on what I've read in history books, I think it's probably the most surprising outcome at the presidential level since 1948, when you remember President Dewey that year. We had other close elections, right? 1960, obviously, 68 was pretty close. 76, we didn't know till the next morning. 2000, obviously, a very, very close one. But I'm not sure we would have been shocked at either outcome in those more recent elections. But last year, I think everybody assumed it was going to go a different way. And I hope you'll quiz Professor Dickinson on that point, because he can take it. He predicted definitively that Donald Trump would be out of the race within weeks. So ask him about that next week. But he admits he erred, I guess. So a very surprising outcome, one that a lot of people weren't happy with, but were quite surprised to see come to pass. And that's caused a lot of angst. It's an unusual presidency, I think that's fair to say. The first time in our nation's history we have a chief executive who's not served in government at all, either in a civilian or military capacity. Someone who I kind of think was surprised by the outcome too. I don't know that for a fact. But is still feeling his way along. And the snickers about the staff are telling, because one area where he's a little behind the curve is on populating his administration, both in terms of the agencies and departments and some of his closer advisors as well. Today is the first day of hurricane season. I heard on the radio coming down, and they interviewed a former FEMA director who asked, well, is it a problem that we don't have a FEMA director right now? And he assured the audience that it's okay because they're at the working level, the operational level of the agency. There are a lot of folks who are on the ball and ready to respond. So I take some comfort in that. But an unusual time, to be sure, and a budget that was presented that is problematic, I think, in many respects. It assumes a 3% growth rate in our GDP, which I'd love to see, but most economists predict it'll be well below that in the next decade. And so when you assume a growth rate that's not realistic and build a budget on that basis, then it's pretty unlikely to be sustainable for the long run. I'm not sure where health care is going. The House passed a bill. We're sure that it's going to be great, whatever it is, but what the Senate ultimately decides to do is going to be interesting as well. We just had a first foreign excursion by the new president with opportunities to perform on the world stage with some positive but some mixed reviews. And the fact that he has a Republican majority in both houses of Congress ought to make it easier for Republican president to implement his agenda, but there's discord within the family as well. So where this all leads, I don't know. But there's an interesting column in The Economist this week that perhaps some of you read, and that's a publication that's not a fan of the current president, to put it charitably. But the columnist said, well, wait a minute, let's step back here and not overreact, because those who are calling for his head now, impeachment, are engaging at his level, basically. And they bear the risk of being criticized as the ones who break the country apart by just focusing on that, as opposed to letting him fail, they were saying, but letting him implement his agenda and see how it comes out. So who knows? I don't want to predict, but I hope you'll insist that Professor Dickinson does next week as to how this will all play out. But the Congress, who at least in the minority party criticize him at every step, don't have a lot of great standing either. I mean, the latest poll I saw showed that the job approval of Congress is 17%, and it's been hovering around there for a long time, regardless of the party majority. So, and I get that. The American people look at an institution that went 4 years without passing a budget, that has racked up $20 trillion in debt, that creates these crises right at the end of a fiscal year and then solves them in dramatic fashion and expects us all to be grateful. They aren't thrilled with that performance either. So we have two branches of government whose job approval is underwater, as the pollsters say, and that doesn't make it very satisfying for anybody. Well, I've talked with folks in Congress, not only those who represent Vermont, but elsewhere, and ask about their experiences. I don't ask, why are you only at 17%? But how could we make it more satisfying? And their answer is perhaps obvious. They say, well, we just don't get to know each other. We come in here on Tuesday morning usually, although Senator McConnell now has insisted on senators coming back Monday night. But then they all leave late Thursday, so they don't socialize, they don't become familiar with each other or their families. There was a time a few decades ago when members of Congress and their families got on a train and went up to somewhere in rural Pennsylvania for a weekend of baseball and barbecue and whatever, and got to know one another on a bipartisan basis. That's a thing of the past. Congressman Welch, before I left office, took me to lunch in the House dining room, and I asked, where is everybody? And he said, oh, nobody comes here anymore. And because they're all going home or raising money for the next campaign or whatever it is. So I think there's a real problem in terms of engagement, and I always believed when I was in the legislature that if I knew I was going to dinner with somebody, I might lay off the rhetoric a little, during debate in the legislative chamber. So I think we've got to find a way to facilitate that. The new senator from Maine, relatively new senator, Senator King, had a brilliant idea, I thought, too brilliant to be implemented. He said, what we should do is come here and spend 3 weeks solid, including weekends, and then go home for a week. None of this back and forth every week for a few days. Well, as I say, I'm not holding my breath, but it's a great idea, I think, and I hope that they might find a way to do that. Another problem I think we have in Washington is the polarization that's caused by gerrymandering, the way they draw those congressional districts, something that's academic in Vermont, since we have one. We used to have more. In the early part of the 19th century, we had 6 members of Congress at one point, before we started admitting all those other states out west. In fact, in 1850, when I presume, our folks voted to admit California, the population of Vermont was greater than that of California. Anyway, it is what it is. But in many states, they gerrymander, they design districts that favor the majority party in that particular legislature at the time. Some of them are being struck down or altered by federal court decisions, but it still is a process that's designed to elect those of a particular party and causes a lot of this polarization. So if you have a safe seat, then the contest is in the primary instead of in the November election. And you've got to be, truer to your base, more conservative folks if you're a Republican, more liberal people if you're a Democrat. And so we get members of Congress who are less centrist. And I think that causes a lot of the polarization that we see in Washington today as well. How do we solve that? Well, there are some states that have nonpartisan districting commissions. My favorite is Iowa, where they load all the data about geography and transportation and population into a computer and push a button, and the districts are drawn. Something like that perhaps would lead to less gerrymandering and less polarization. Now that doesn't address the Senate because they don't have to redistrict. That's statewide, right? So why is the Senate more polarized? You might ask. Well, I have a theory there too. It's not original. There's increasing scholarship about a phenomenon called ideological migration. And what that means is that people are deciding to live in areas with people who think as they do. So think about it. I run into people who are new to Vermont, and I'll ask, welcome, where'd you come from? Why'd you decide to come here? Well, I heard about this liberal nirvana here, and I wanted to be a part of it. Oh, welcome. And conversely, a lot of folks, more conservative people, are moving from northeastern states, south and west, and so we're polarizing ourselves. And I think that's unfortunate. I think a community is more vibrant and successful if there's a diversity of opinion and different points of view. But this is clearly happening across the country, and we can't tell people where to live, but it's something to be aware of. I think with all due respect to some people who are in the business, the media are a factor. I remember the days. Ralph's only a few months older than I am, but even I remember the days when the only way we got our news was watching the evening newscasts on the three major networks, or getting a newspaper, usually in the morning, occasionally in the afternoon. But now with a 24/7 news cycle, where all these cable stations have to fill the time with something, we get a nonstop feeding frenzy of news and commentary, and obviously there's a bent, as certain networks have a predisposition to one point of view or another, and I think that's contributing to our sense of angst and polarization too. Now, again, I don't have an answer for that. We have a First Amendment. People have the right to say and produce and broadcast whatever they want, but I really believe that that's contributing to a lot of the anger and anxiety that we see in our country today. So, pretty depressing, isn't it? So how are things in Vermont compared to all of that? Better, but the way I look at it is better than most other places, but not as good as it used to be. Now there's a little kerfuffle now over the state budget, and that's fine, it'll work itself out. But as I look at legislative reports, roll call votes, it's largely party line in the House, and less so in the Senate. They're a little more free form, but in my day we didn't have that. It was a rarity when parties lined up against each other and had votes along party lines in the House. It was all across different kinds of lines, like rural versus urban, or the farm group, or the lawyers against whom we all like to vote, or different coalitions that had nothing to do with party. But now it's a little more partisan in Montpelier than it was. And I half jokingly say that we shouldn't have built the interstate highways. I mentioned that folks in Congress don't get to know each other, and to a lesser degree, there's some of that at the state level too. I mean, the folks who live in St. Albans and serve in the legislature on a good day can be there in less than an hour. And that's well beyond the largest populated area where most legislators live. So I think we see some of that happening in Montpelier as well. More commuters, understandable because of their responsibilities to home and job, but it's still a factor. But I guess another question about how things are going in Vermont is beyond our legislative deliberations specifically. We've got some challenges here, and I think we should be honest about them. We're stagnating in terms of our population and aging. The population didn't change much in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Then about late 50s, I would say, IBM came to Chittenden County. The interstates were built in the 50s. We were deemed the beckoning country by folks in Montpelier, and we encouraged people to come here not only as visitors but as residents. And so in the second half of the 20th century, we saw some steady growth in our state's population, but it's flattened over the last 15 years or so. And I think we have to ask ourselves why. I mean, this is the best place on the planet to live, right? I mean, we've got the lowest crime rate in America. We've got the cleanest air in the Northeast. We've got a highly educated population. We've got natural beauty that's unsurpassed. We got no tolls on our roads or bridges. We've got pretty good internet service in most parts of the state. Why wouldn't people want to live here and be a part of our future? And I have some thoughts on that, but let me give you a few statistics first. Since 2010, Vermont's population has been pretty much flat. It's grown more slowly than any state except West Virginia. 2/3 of the cities and towns in Vermont have fewer residents than they did 5 years ago, 6 years ago now. In the southern 4 counties, including here, only 3 towns grew in population by a total of 18. Overall, the 4 southern counties have declined by about 3,500. So there's a shift in population even as it remains relatively flat. The Northwest is growing, the metropolitan area, and the rest of the state is getting smaller. We have net domestic outmigration now. That means more people are moving out of Vermont to live in other states than are moving here. And most people who are moving in are older, retiring here. A lot of Middlebury grads want to live out their lives in the community where they went to college, which is great. We're happy to have them. But economically, that presents a problem. Older Vermonters are very generous, donating to projects such as the new library here in Manchester. They volunteer their time, but they usually don't have kids in the schools, nor do they enter the workforce. So our K through 12 population, as you probably know, has been plummeting over the last quarter century, down 24% in the last 18 years. We have 25,000 fewer students than we did at that point. My first year in office in 2003, I was concerned about this because the trend had begun, and I asked economists and others, and they said, it is going down, but we expect it to bottom out in 2017. They told me this 14 years ago, and then it'll begin to increase. Hasn't happened. And now what they're saying is it'll continue to decline until 2030 at the earliest, and then begin to move up again. And that's why we're seeing a lot of stress about consolidating schools and combining school districts because the cost per pupil here is getting very, very high. And our working age population is dropping too. We're down 23,000 people in the 21 to 44 age group. We have the highest percentage of our high school graduates in America leaving their home state to go to college, present company excluded. Thank you, Hayden. Our workforce is down 10,000 in the last 5 years. We often tout the low unemployment rate, but that doesn't mean much when both the numerator and denominator are going down. The number of housing permits issued on an annual basis is half what it was in 2005. We're the second oldest state by median age. We're aging quickly. In the next decade, those of us 65 and over, that cohort of the population will grow at a rate 10 times the overall population of the state. And what are the implications of that? Well, higher health care costs, for one thing, but fewer caregivers because the younger population is declining. That's the part that worries me. Fewer employees available, fewer innovators, a lack of growth in our tax base. So why is this happening when this is the best place to live in the world? Well, I've been saying, and Governor Scott's been saying, that we've got an affordability crisis, and he said recently that what keeps him up at night is the fact that we see a decline of 6 people in our workforce every day, and we lose 3 kids. We don't lose them, but we have 3 fewer kids in our public schools every day, and we've got to do something to reverse that. The Wall Street Journal had an article recently about this trend, and they talked about the entire region, the northern New England states, so we're not unique in this. And they identified 3 reasons for this trend. One is lack of affordable housing. I certainly see that. We have a very low vacancy rate in Vermont. We didn't go through the bust at the time of the Great Recession. Our housing prices stayed relatively stable compared to other places. So a lot of people just can't afford to find a place to live, even if they can find a job in Vermont. The second reason is high taxes, which is a part of housing costs, but it's beyond that. As one financial advisor told me recently, the real killer, pun intended, is the estate tax. There are only 15 states that have one, and we're one of them, and the threshold is relatively low. And the third reason, the Wall Street Journal noted, is the lack of job opportunities for spouses. And we see that at Middlebury. When the college is trying to recruit a distinguished professor or a new administrator, several presidents in a row have said to me, we got to find something for the spouse to do. We're really looking for 2 jobs. And sometimes there's an opportunity on campus, but not always. And so that's why Middlebury and other institutions are concerned about the softness of our state's economy and the need for the creation of more and better paying jobs. So that article in the Journal is pretty consistent with what I was saying back when I was in state government. I said we have housing costs that are too high, taxes that are too high, higher education is high, even at our public institutions, and healthcare costs are relatively high here. There was a chart in, I think, the Journal again that showed the increases that I'm sure you've heard the Blue Cross is asking for exchange policies next year, and they're higher than they are in some other places. So I think that's the picture here, and the formula for moving forward seems pretty obvious: to attack those costs of living, but we need willing partners in the General Assembly to see that as well. Well, I guess I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about one other trend, and that sort of 800-pound gorilla, at least up in our part of the state. 3 months ago tomorrow, we had a little episode on campus. You get my drift? Where a speaker was denied the opportunity to express his views, and that's certainly put Middlebury on the map in a way. In a week or so, I'll have my reunion, so it'll be interesting to get a perspective of alums as to how they see all of this. By the way, Hayden, you and I will be reuniting throughout eternity because they bring the classes back at 5-year intervals. So we're on the same cycle. See? Yeah. I won't tell you how many, but we're on the same cycle. Well, this is, I think this is a problem. And I was pleased to see even our junior U.S. senator say that everybody ought to have a chance to be heard, regardless of his or her perspective. But we see it not only with guest speakers whom students and others don't like, but at these congressional so-called town halls that have been held during the congressional recess, a lot of people not wanting to listen to their members of Congress, deciding before they've ever even heard anything that they don't like what the member has to say. Folks walking out on the Vice President of the United States when he gave a commencement speech last month. I mean, I've had a few demonstrations directed at me through the years, but I've never been denied the opportunity to go forward, and even after a minor, brief disruption. And I think back to my days as a student at Middlebury. It was during the Vietnam War, a lot of different points of view, and I was in the minority. In fact, there was an article in the college paper that labeled me Nixon's man on campus. But nobody ever denied me the right to say what I wanted to say or to be heard. So I'm worried about this incivility, about the lack of respect for someone else. We don't have to agree with everybody. We don't have to change our mind after we've heard them, but I think we have to let them speak. And there are different ways to respond to that. You can not go. You can have your own event at another place and or time. Or you could go stand outside the venue and politely hold a sign or something. But to be so disruptive as to deny someone the opportunity to be heard, I think is a dangerous step forward. So I don't know how that'll be resolved, but it needs to be, because I think it's hurt the brand of our alma mater and is causing a lot of angst in the alumni community and elsewhere around the country. It's a trend that we ought to be quite concerned about. So where do we go? Well, I hope the folks in Montpelier will work on the affordability crisis that has lingered for some time. Delighted to see a budget with no new taxes or fees for the first time in quite a long time. So that's a positive step. But I hope you'll be able to find some common ground with the governor to move forward and attack the cost of living, because in the end, I think that's going to be what we need to reverse these undesirable trends. At the national level, who knows? Even with all the stress, there might be some positive outcomes from the administration. We go through phases in our national and state political history. We kind of swing the pendulum to one side of the spectrum, and then it kind of goes back and rebalances over time. I think it's fair to say that that we've had a lot of federal regulation imposed in recent years that we might see lightened somewhat now, and that I think could be positive. We might see a little rebalancing of our federal judiciary. The Supreme Court appointment that's been made already doesn't really do that. It just replaces a justice of like mind. But over time, perhaps there'll be a little more rebalancing there. And maybe we'll get control of federal spending a little. Every president's budget is deemed dead on arrival, so that reaction doesn't really bother me. And some of the cuts are quite dramatic in non-defense spending, but but we have a $20 trillion hole. We keep spending hundreds of billions every year more than the revenue that comes in. That's not sustainable. And we've got to get that under control one way or another. So let's hope we can. But we've got a lot of challenges both here and at our national level. So some of us are, geezers now, and we'll be yielding the stage to a younger generation. We hope they'll be more successful in some of these fiscal and regulatory fronts than we've been. But I think we have to take them all very seriously, and hope I haven't dampened your spirits too much on a lovely, sunny late afternoon and late spring in Manchester. But I think it's important to put these issues on the table. I'm very interested to hear what you have to say. Thank you very, very much.
I would be interested to know what the response was from the president of Middlebury College to the incident. And on the second part, had you been president, how would that have been different?
Not a position to which I aspire, since I think 98% of her time is spent raising money. The president at her inaugural address, which was a year and a half ago, I thought set the right tone for what was to follow a year and a half later. She talked about the need for diverse opinions to be heard on the campus, and so I was very encouraged by the thoughts that she laid out just as she assumed her presidency. The college has a somewhat curious disciplinary process, and 70-ish students, I guess, or more, have gone through it. There have been a number of sanctions imposed. They range all the way from a temporary letter in your file that will be shredded at graduation, which meant for some of them it was in the file for weeks, to a permanent letter in your file that might be shared with a graduate school to which you apply or a future employer. But that's it. And I don't think that's severe enough, to be honest. I mean, it's a sort of judicial process. I shouldn't prejudge it. They had to try to determine which students were doing what. There was a lot of photographic evidence that gave them some help with that. But it seems to me it doesn't send a strong enough message to others who might like to engage in this sort of disruption in the future. And I have another thought. I think some professors should be held accountable. I understand tenure, but if you go to an event like that as a disruptor, and you see your professor there behaving that way, it kind of legitimizes it, doesn't it? So I think they're as responsible, maybe more so, for facilitating it. Now, it's just a handful of them, but I think there should be some accountability there. And of course, the answer I've gotten when I've raised this is, well, tenure, we can't touch them. And I said, well, I don't know. I remember an assistant attorney general who worked in my office years ago, and he had a great motto. It was, fire first, fight later. So I think some more serious sanctions were in order.
Well, I guess first of all, I wanted to address what the incident in Middlebury. I'm a Middlebury parent, so I do have some connection. But don't you think that the behavior of our president, his rude and his boorish behavior, while he shoves the president of Montenegro and has no use for leaders of countries that he's not interested in, he's rude to his wife, he's just rude all around. And don't you think that trickles down to the civility of our society?
Yes? Yeah, well, sure. But we've got to try to find a way to do better. And I was talking with a member of the college administration about this, and there was a small group of us chatting about it. And one student spoke up and said, "Well, I assume this is something that we're taught at home, how to behave and how to respect other people." And this assistant to the president said, "Well, I'm glad you were, but obviously some were not." And so the college is thinking, as further answer to your question, Randy, about some kind of curricular response. I mean, maybe there has to be a course, a freshman seminar or something on civility, on how to respect differences. So that discussion's going on as well. But sure, I mean, the whole tone in Washington is not a good example.
Much of the rhetoric in Washington being based around truth and honesty, and different positions being taken by members of the Republican Party, particularly now versus the last 8 years. What responsibility does the Republican majority have to speak up when, in cases like today, climate change is a hoax, becomes a national policy?
Well, there are different views within the Republican Party, I'm sure, on that topic specifically. And some have spoken up. I think of Senator Burr from North Carolina, who chairs the Intelligence Committee, who says we're going to have a serious bipartisan investigation into this whole Russia thing, and I believe him. The vice chairman of the committee, Senator Warner, is a former gubernatorial colleague from Virginia, and I have great respect for him. So I think some are. I think on the health care bill, there's going to be some different points of view in the Senate, and that's going to cause some moderation there. So I think there will be some Republicans speaking up, but you know, there are others who are interested in their own reelection, and where the president is very popular, and so they're trying to thread that needle, I guess, and not show disrespect for their constituents who are real fans, but still trying to do what they believe is right. So I don't know how it's going to sugar up, but certainly some Republicans have expressed their discontent.
Have you been surprised by the severity of the problem of the EB-5 scandal in the Northeast Kingdom? And also, are you surprised at the severity of the drug problem that our state now is confronting?
Yes, on both counts. Let me address them. I think I can remember two parts of a question. If you don't ask me a three-parter. The EB-5 program, you're familiar with what that is? It's an immigrant visa program where a foreign national invests either $1 million or $500,000 in a project in the United States that creates a minimum of 10 jobs. And in Vermont, because we're I forgot the exact phrase. Well, it's based on the economy or unemployment rate, but we're an area where the lower threshold applies. We've been, it passed Congress in 1990. It was kind of a sleeper program. Nobody paid much attention to it until maybe 10 or a dozen years after that. And then Jay Peak, first and foremost, and some other Vermont businesses began to take advantage of it. And I went on a few missions to other countries to encourage investment. And it seemed to me to be working well from everything I could see. After I left office, I think it was 2012, there were a few red flags that went up, and one of them was where the Jay Peak immigration lawyer resigned suddenly in a huff and a broadside against the company, questioning its numbers and veracity in terms of administering the program. So I called, I'm just at Middlebury then, but I called the CEO of Jay, and I said, hey, what's going on here? And I got a plausible response. And I thought, well, all right, I mean, it's not really my business now, but I was kind of curious about it. So I like to think that if I'd still been in office, I might have pursued the line of questioning a little more vigorously than was done. It's a real disappointment to hear what's going on with the folks up there. I still think it could be a valuable program, and there are other places around the state that have used it without controversy. Not as big as Jay, but quite successfully. But now, of course, it's on the chopping block in Washington because there have been a number of cases of abuse. And there are legitimate concerns. I saw a map of Manhattan, for example, that had lines drawn to justify a high unemployment area in, like the Ritz or somewhere. I mean, they just, speaking of gerrymandering, I mean, that's what they did with the lines for the EB-5 program, too. So there was some monkey business around the country, and I think maybe it's fair to take another look at it. But yeah, I was surprised. I thought, it's a program that's got several levels of vetting. The U.S. Immigration Service has to review all the applications. Our Commerce Agency approved individual projects. We had outside lawyers looking at it. So yes, I'm surprised, Don, that it turned out the way it did. You asked about the opiate crisis, and I responded in the affirmative, but maybe too hastily, because when I was first running for office in 2002, the statistics were starting to look troubling. I saw the numbers of heroin overdose deaths, ER admissions for opioid problems, and they were trending pretty dramatically upward. And so I, in my first term, instituted a program I called DETER, which was drug enforcement, treatment, education, and rehabilitation, a significant chunk of money for all aspects of the problem to try to confront it. But the trend continued, and it just seems unabated. So I think we have to continue to work on all those fronts. Enforcement side to make sure that dealers are not welcome here. More education. We had counselors in every high school in the state, but then later in my tenure, someone said, that's too late. And that's probably true. So I think we have to get more drug counseling in the younger grades. And when I started, we had one recovery center in White River Junction. Now we have 11 or 12, I think, around the state, where ex-addicts can go and spend time with others who've had that experience. And we have more methadone options, buprenorphine treatment. Now they have Narcan that I hadn't even heard of it when I was in office. So I think we've got to confront all the different aspects of what's happening because it's insidious. And there's an economic impact too, right? I mean, I talked with a Bennington County official, whom I won't identify, about the economy, and he said, well, everybody in our county who's not on drugs has a job. But it's with a shrinking workforce, we can't afford to lose people to addiction. We need them to work. So it's a very serious problem in Vermont and beyond. But there's an expert in the back who can augment or correct me.
Just stick on that subject for a moment. Could you give us your assessments of debates relating to the legalization of marijuana and how that plays out in the bigger issue of the drug abuse issue?
Yeah, I can say what I think now. I'm not in office. I guess I always did. I'm against it. I don't think it's the right step. I've heard all the arguments. I'm not naive. I grew up in the '60s, but it is a gateway for some people. Now, maybe not for everybody, but I still remember a conversation I had when I was in office with a young man in Windham County who made that point to me. He said, you know, you're going to hear this isn't a gateway drug. It was for me. And I think that Governor Scott makes a good point about the inability to, or the difficulty in enforcing it on the highways. We've got all these efforts to discourage people from drinking alcohol and then getting behind the wheel of a car, but here's a substance that, at least at this point, can't be measured as precisely. Perhaps that will change. And the police chief up in Heinsberg said there was a case of a fatal accident in his community where the driver was impaired by marijuana. And so I think it's, I don't understand the enthusiasm for it. The governor of Colorado is not a big fan. Remember, it passed out there by referendum, not by the, no other state's done it through its legislature. It's all been by a popular vote. But they're running into issues. The black market hasn't gone away. I was out there once at a conference and saw a report on the local news where they're concerned about pot in processed foods. I mean, we all joke about brownies, but what the reporter was saying is that in packaged processed foods now, it's finding its way in, and it's listed, you know, disclosure, but who reads those ingredients on, you know, on a cookie mix or something that you're buying? And so there are just a number of issues that would lead me to think it's not a good step. So I wouldn't support it. But this gentleman's been patient.
I enjoyed your presentation very much. Thank you. So I'd like to get touch again on the issue of climate change, although it's more scientific findings in general. And I want to ask you now, in your capacity as a recovering public officer, when you hear other public officers in Congress, particularly but not exclusively from oil-rich states or coal-rich states, invoking the plausible deniability of climate change science, in your opinion, and I've wondered this for years, these are men and women who went to college and who always follow their medical doctor's prescriptions, don't question them. Do you believe that they truly, honestly doubt the science, or is that the articulation necessary, as they see it, to maintain their political position? That is to say, how wide is the gap, right, between their honest understanding and their political existential?
You're suggesting a politician would be less than forthright? I honestly don't know the answer to that. There's no question, though, that your latter thesis makes a lot of sense. And I listened to most of the president's press conference in the car coming down today, and he was certainly focusing on the coal economy and saying that I don't know anything about the Paris Accord either, but said that it allowed developing countries to develop more coal resources and prohibited the United States from doing so. And so he said, if we're going to have more coal in the world, let's have it here, basically. And so, you know, okay, maybe, I don't know. And he said we've got to have renewables, but if we're going to have a strong economy and get to that 3% growth rate, we've got to have all options on the table. So I guess what I'm saying is there's a plausible economic argument aside from the point about whether what they believe, and I don't know. You know, I saw an article by a British scientist. His name escapes me a while ago, and he said even here we're too polarized. He said we've got the deniers and we've got those who are sure that you know, it's the worst calamity that's going to befall the human race. He said, my personal view is that it's real, but it's not as serious as some people say. And so, you know, maybe even in that debate, there's a sort of middle ground. But, I don't know. Young man?
Now that you're free from the restrictions of being an office holder, I was wondering whether you might care to comment on the ever-increasing influence that the teachers union, the NEA, seems to have over the Democratic Party, which they virtually own in this state, resulting in what we're seeing now, their unwillingness to reasonably negotiate the health care plans and their refusal to to come to the table about that issue.
Well, I know them well. They've never endorsed me. I remember once going to my so-called endorsement interview, and the head of the union was there fumbling with some papers, and said, "Yes, I have an article here in which you were quoted. I want to ask you about this. It says you referred to us as union bosses." "What's the question?" I asked. So I knew that wasn't going too far. I honestly think your assessment is exactly right. I mean, I'm kind of looking as an outsider now, but it would seem to me that the minority party in Montpelier, the majority party in Montpelier is looks like a wholly owned subsidiary. And I was thinking, I understand they're going to be largely supportive of union positions, but couldn't they just once say no? Just this once? Because it just seems like a no-brainer to me. And some of you may follow John McClory's musings on various topics, and he had an interesting thought in the last week or so where he said there's another answer to this, which is not to bargain with the teachers at the state level, but to make the health insurance plan statutory, which is what is the case for the retirement program. Just say, here the state will or the districts will pay 80%, and that's it as a matter of law, as opposed to requiring a negotiation at the state level. I mean, this is the argument that we're interfering with collective bargaining gets a little weak, because the legislature in the 40s said the retirement program will be set by the legislature, the contribution rates, the benefit structure, it's not going to be on the bargaining table. So they could do the same with the health plan. Conversely, when I was in the House in the 70s, we went the other direction for state employees. My first couple of years in the House, the legislature, by enactment, determined the pay grades and step rates and specific salary numbers for every state employee. And I thought, this is ridiculous. So I sponsored the bill to move that onto the bargaining table and get it out of the legislative process. So what's bargained, what's not, can ebb and flow. And I think this is an opportunity to achieve some savings. And let's face it, most taxpayers who are footing the bill for school employees don't have a deal like that. So I think I'm disappointed that they aren't just this once standing up to the union and saying, come on.
Both the issues of partisanship and civility came up before. In an ideal world, what would you say are the characteristics required in true leadership, whether it's at the state level or the national level? I mean, we realize that where politics are concerned, this may be the ideal world, but to me, the quality of most organizations depends entirely on the quality of the leadership. What do you think those most important qualities are in a leader?
I think integrity, honesty are at the top of the list. I think of transparency. I think of people who come up to me through the years and said, I don't agree with you on this or that or on much, but I know you're telling it like it is. You're working hard. You have the best interests of the state at heart, and that's why I'm going to vote for it, not because I agree with you on anything. So I think those are the most important qualities. Energy and an ability to listen and engage, I think are important as well. I often say that I spent more time drinking coffee with legislators whose company I didn't really enjoy than you might imagine, but that's the job. And a lot of folks point out that the 44th president, who left office earlier this year, was not a schmoozer, and that was one of his weak points. I mean, he's a brilliant guy, a real intellect, but he didn't enjoy or force himself to engage with legislative leaders the way he frankly should have. But I think honesty is number one.
In the small town of Portland, I come across building requirements and regulations which really seem to be a new business. Do you have a view as to where Portland stands, the state of Vermont stands on a national stage in terms of regulations and friendliness towards business?
Well, all the surveys show us at or near the bottom of the rankings. The last one I saw showed that Vermont was the 47th best state in which to do business. And we can quarrel with the methodology, but that's what's out there, and that's what business leaders see. And there's an industry, perhaps some of you are familiar with it, business location specialists who help their clients to determine where to locate or expand, and they pay attention to those things. So I think we've got some serious work to do to become a place that's more inviting for entrepreneurship. I'll give you one, my favorite example of that. There's a company up in Swanton called Vermont Precision Tools. They make little things, measuring devices for surgical instruments, and so that's why it's precision tools. And they went through a somewhat protracted process to move out of the founder's garage into a nice facility in the industrial park. I mean, it was an industrial park, and it still took them longer than it should have. But then, a few years later, the founder, who since died, said, "Oh, I guess I should make a confession to you. I just opened a little plant in Kentucky." I said, "Kentucky? Your company's Vermont Precision Tools." And he said, "I got to tell you, I get my permits so much faster down there. I mean, it's just reality." And there are other examples. Usually companies not picking up and moving completely, but growing elsewhere or moving pieces of their operation. And it's not, sometimes ideology isn't enough. When Keurig and Burton Snowboards move some of their operations out of Vermont because it's too expensive to do business here, we should understand that there's a problem. So I think that's got to be taken more seriously by our policymakers as well.
First, taking off on what we were just talking about, can you explain or do you understand why the environmental court is it? I'm thinking it's just underfunded, as the whole court system is. But it takes the environmental court when a case comes before it, over a year to get heard, just heard. And we've had one case already of a development here in Manchester that was put on the shelf, even though it lasted the year they got their permit. But in the meantime, they lost their financing. So that's gone. Now we have a new one that's very active. An outfit wants to open up a old folks home. It's just my way of thinking of it, since I'm an old folk. In what was built to be just that, and was used as a school for a while, and now it wants to be used on its original use. And a local person, business owner, in that business has filed a suit on the permit. And the the Environmental Corps. It's not going to hear it for 13 or 14 months. Now talk about permanent problems and unfriendly business factors. Do you know why that is?
I don't, but I wasn't aware of that extent of the delay. But let me just give a quick recap of how we got the system we have now. In 2003 or 4, we streamlined, believe it or not, the appeals process, because it used to be there were 5 different places you could go: the Environmental Court, the Environmental Board, the Water Resources Board, the Air Quality Variance Board, the Solid Waste Panel. You could be sent to 5 different state appellate entities, and so we consolidated that, and it's now all the Environmental Court. And I remember, and we doubled the number of judges from 1 to 2, and I remember asking, and I remember asking at the time, is this enough? I mean, we want to make sure that this is staffed adequately, and they said, well, we need some more, clerks and administrative staff, but everybody said 2 judges seemed to be sufficient. But if that's not the case now, then there's an obvious remedy, and they should.
There's only 1 now. Right. 1, but I may be in error on that. That could explain it. The second question has to do with actually everything you talked about and possible solutions. I'm wondering if you're aware of any initiatives, any place in the country, but especially in Vermont, to get the divisions talking to each other. I'm thinking of, if you're trying to start something, I have already started, you read the letters to the editor, and you see the liberal and the conservative side, and then the ultra-conservative side, and some of those are very insulting letters. I called up one writer of one of these insulting letters and said, look, I'm one of these liberals that you cascaded there. I understand the issue was an interesting issue about Vietnam, which is still alive. We're still arguing about that legitimately. And I said, why don't you and I get together for coffee? I think differently than you. And maybe we could start a group where we each get more people to come in and agree to just listen. And maybe that would spread. Is there anything else like that? Is there what kind of solutions do you see?
Well, there are some efforts. There's a group called No Labels that Governor Huntsman from Utah and somebody else started to try to get people different points of view to talk to each other. And then, as Ralph mentioned in his introduction, I serve now on a group at an organization called the Bipartisan Policy Center in Washington. And this was created a decade or so ago by Senators Dole, Daschle, Baker, and Mitchell, 4 former majority leaders, 2 of each party, who were concerned about the deterioration of the level of civility in the body that they loved and served for so long. So they created this think tank, and they went along for a couple of years, and then they said, well, maybe we need to get a few ex-govs to join us to broaden the conversation. So we have a little group there, 5 of us, and what we've done over the last year or so is adopt a particular strategy. There are 11 U.S. senators who are former governors, and so we thought maybe they could be the beginning of a rational civil discourse down there. And so we've met with them a number of times. Most recently was February or March, and have dinner with them. And our pitch at the initial meeting was, look, you folks know what it's like to govern. You had to deal with legislators across the aisle. You had to pass a budget every year. You had to get stuff done. And so maybe you can bring that experience to your 89 colleagues and get them to start talking to each other. Well, I'm not naive, but they have they formed what they call a governor's caucus in the Senate. They're meeting regularly. We like to go there every now and then to shore them up, but they meet on their own as well. They worked on a bill in the last Congress that wasn't monumental. It dealt with consolidating workforce training programs, which had proliferated into like 47 different ones, literally, across the federal government. And they reduced that number all the way down to, all right, 35. But they gave governors more flexibility on spending. And so it's not the biggest deal in the world, but it's a positive step, and they did it together. And so now they're talking about Medicaid reform. That was the topic of our dinner conversation a few months ago, which has the capacity to be very contentious, but we've got a tripartisan group, as Senator King keeps reminding us, that are meeting and talking about these things. And sometimes the conversation got a little edgy, but it was respectful, I thought. And so that's sort of my little project, but it's, as I say, I'm not naive. I thought we were getting somewhere back in 2009 when, or 2010 when the Affordable Care Act went through. I was chairman of NGA then, the National Governors Association, which was an adventure, especially during that debate. Imagine sitting around a table with 49 colleagues who have different points of view, but there were some in the Congress. Speaker Pelosi, I'll be chastised by my Republican friends for saying so, but who was very accessible, very engaged, interested in what governors had to say, and trying to facilitate a consideration of the concerns that we were raising. So I was optimistic about, and Senator Snowe was the only Republican on the Finance Committee to vote for the act. So I thought, well, there's a hope of some bipartisan outcome there. But then, at some point, the word came down that we're going to ram this through on a party line vote, and it all went away. So I've been to the altar before, and retreated, but we're going to keep working through the Bipartisan Policy Center to try to get people to talk to each other.
Thank you, Governor. Quick question, following up on what you had talked about next steps and on the point about economic development opportunities. Specifically, you mentioned affordable housing. As you probably know, the governor introduced an affordable housing proposal at the beginning of the session that was received, I think, quite well. And I'd love to get your thoughts on the affordable housing bond idea. But also, I'm not sure if you've heard, but the Vermont Senate Majority Leader from Windham County was recently on a radio program about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And she was asked about what Ralph had mentioned a few minutes ago, the teachers' health care savings idea for $26 million in savings annually. And she was opposed to it, and she said if the governor keeps pushing this, we might not have to invest in affordable housing for Vermont. Yeah. So A, what do you think about the proposal, the governor's proposal, and B, are those types of tactics where, if we don't like what the governor's doing, we're gonna cut investments in important things? Is that something you experienced in your time, or is that really too far? I don't recall an experience like that, to be honest. Sometimes backroom chatter, threats, but never materialized in my experience. Of course, I wish that the governor of Vermont had what 41 other governors do, namely the line item veto, so that it's not all or nothing when a bill comes to his or her desk. I'm not familiar with this. I've heard of the $35 million housing bond initiative. I don't know the details, but the problem is real. Affordable housing has gotten oxymoronic in a lot of parts of our state, and I think that's a major impediment to growing our working age population and ultimately our economy. I had a proposal called New Neighborhoods. I wanted to work with communities and get them to identify areas that would make sense for building some affordable housing, and then cut, or not out completely, but reduce the regulatory burden to accomplish that. And the only one that actually happened is in Essex Junction, I think. But I had another initiative to take these second and third stories of older downtown buildings that are often vacant, and to provide incentives to developers to turn that into housing. That didn't go anywhere. And so I guess that I didn't experience the specific dynamic you theorized, but there's another dynamic that's troubling, and that is
if it's his idea, we're against it. And you know, you remember my Promise Scholarship program 10 dozen years ago. This was another concern I had, and I see Maine has done this now, and maybe some other places. I said, if we can keep college graduates here by providing some financial support for them in exchange for a commitment to remain in Vermont for X number of years after they graduate, I think that would help build our workforce. Well, DOA was the response from a key legislator at that point, and ultimately we got kind of a little tiny step forward. Well, incredibly, the same year, the governor of Michigan, who was a Democrat, had the same experience. We were chatting at an NGA meeting, and she said, you won't believe what happened to me. I had this great idea to create a scholarship program to keep kids after college in Michigan, and that Republican legislature killed it. I mean, that's the point we've been talking about. I mean, this polarization of, you know, if it's my idea, you're against it, vice versa. But here's the mirror opposite from a party standpoint happening in two different states at the exact same time. I mean, if it's a good idea, it ought to happen. And you know, maybe we need to find ways to make it their idea, you know, but yeah, I don't know. It's frustrating. The Honorable Mrs. Livingston. Oh, you have the last word.
God, what an opportunity. Governor, Efficiency Vermont.
Oh, yes.
I am I've always been concerned about the fact that on every electric bill in this state, including big corporations, companies that use a lot of electricity, there's a tax. It is not called a tax, it's called an efficiency charge. And it's really a hidden fee. The voters don't know about it. When they look at their bill, it says efficiency charge, and they assume that it's good for something. They don't realize that that goes up according to the legislature when they vote an increase in it, and they don't have any say in it. I think it's unconscionable.
Well, on the one hand, we're proud of this organization called Efficiency Vermont that helps people retrofit their homes and buildings and provide incentives to reduce your consumption. I mean, that's a good goal. The problem is it's gotten quite large. And there were some years when I recommended less of an increase than ultimately was approved by the legislature. But I did see that they're now talking about actually reducing it this next year. So, yeah, there may be hope on the... Oh, well, all right. But, you know, it's a foot in the door. So it is substantial. And what it highlights, Judy, is that one of the costs of doing business that's so high here is electricity. I mean, you see the comparisons around New England that vary. Some years were the highest, other years were in the middle of the pack. But electric costs are very high in the Northeast compared to the rest of the country. And so that's a major factor, especially for manufacturers who rely on a lot of it. The late IBM plant up in Essex Junction had an annual electric bill of like $30 million, which is a lot even for IBM. And I remember there was a surge once that caused a brief outage that the electricity came right back on, but someone at the plant told me that cost them $1 million just because of the surge. So electric costs are one of a number of costs of doing business that are quite high here, and that tax is obviously a part of it. Well, I'm getting the word, the hook. But when I thought about what to discuss today, I thought, well, I could talk about the birds singing in the springtime and how lovely everything is. But I thought it's important to have a serious discussion about the challenges that we're facing nationally and at the state level, and explore with you some ideas or strategies on how we might move in a more positive direction. But it's not going to turn around overnight. But realizing the challenges that we face, I think, is clearly the first step. So it's nice of you to invite me, and thank you all, and great to be here. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.